Today I find myself playing with a Becker 1402 that has an interesting issue. You will have to excuse my voice today. I am recovering from that well-known illness that has struck me down. I am in recovery stages now, fortunately, though. I do still feel like I'm half dead, but anyway, I needed something to entertain myself, and my friend gave me this Becker to play with. Anyway, about half of the time you turn it on, it basically crashes instantly. No doubt it won't do it when I'm testing it on camera. It's going to do it. Possibly. Because you saw it do something bizarre then, coming up with a radio station before the code request. That's usually in combination with this issue. Other times you basically push the on button and nothing happens. Of course it's not going to do it while I've got the camera on, but I will get it to crash off camera and explain what I have found. So anyway, with these symptoms I was suspicious of a few things. Firstly, power, but I couldn't see anything wrong with the power side of things. I then was suspicious of the power on reset. These use the Intel MCS51 series 8-bit microcontrollers. It is a 8031 in particular, with an external EEPROM. And the CPU board is actually a removable shielded module. I've got the shielding removed for the testing purposes, but the power on reset circuit can be on either. On this model, it is actually on the board here, and I'll just show you that power on reset. It needs to hold the reset line of that CPU high for 2 cycles when powering on to reset it, and you'll see that flash on my scope. Anyway, as you could hopefully see there, the power on reset circuit is actually working, and it is working every time you push the on button. So the microcontroller is getting reset every time, yet occasionally it's getting that reset signal. I can see the crystal oscillator frequency perfectly, but the CPU actually halts and the display is completely gibberish, and all of the buttons are non-responsive, and there's no way to turn the deck off without disconnecting power from it, unless you manually bring that reset line to high, but that's not practical unless you want to install a reset switch on your deck. I'm not going to do that. If you can see the scope in the distance there, we've got some serial communication coming from that microcontroller, presumably going to the tuner and the display or control panel. I don't have a schematic for this thing, so I'm making a lot of assumptions here, but when you manually enter in a frequency, you can see that numbers are changing, but there's nothing changing on the scope yet. But once it is entered, communication occurs. So it must be actually reprogramming the tuner as well as doing things with the control panel. You change presets, you can see that communication occurring instantly. So I'm thinking that is configuring the tuner for the set frequency, or something along those lines anyway, because yes, you can put in digits and there is no communication until the final one is entered, and then it's done. But anyway, that's what it looks like when it's working. You just saw the fault there. Occasionally it just doesn't even start. see if I can get it to misbehave completely on camera. I've had it misbehave many times, but I just can't get it to do it on camera. That's rather annoying. So anyway, long story short, not every repair is just solder joints and capacitors. That was not the case here. This microcontroller, the 8031 in particular, was just randomly not starting up properly. It got to the point where it was 50% of the time not starting. So that's the one that came with the Becker. And this is a unit that I've recovered from an old 126 KE Jetronic ECU. Don't worry, it's a emissions hampered one that nobody cares about, but the MCU is still of interest. They're still made in the aftermarket. Intel doesn't make them anymore, but they're not expensive anyway. Good thing about these Beckers is just about everything electronic is pretty much off the shelf, and it's not actually that hard to repair. But if you don't know what you're doing, I wouldn't be going and spending hundreds of dollars on one, even if some clown says it's tested working fine, because it's not going to work for long unless you're getting it from some authorized or experienced person that knows how to rebuild them. I know there's some on eBay that do just that. I wouldn't be spending top dollar on anything that's used that hasn't been rebuilt. That's my only advice here. This kind of repair isn't for everyone, but I enjoy it. I'm in lockdown, I'm sick, so I needed something to entertain myself, and I've socketed that now, and I have taken a copy of that EEPROM, and I'm going to compare it with mine to see if that's where the pin code is stored. I'm not sure. I'm just interested to see the difference. So the Becker is working, it's stable, it's starting every time, it's not crashing anymore. The ignition switch positive input is not crashing it like it was before. I can't get it to fault now, so I'm reasonably confident that MCU was faulty. I did actually put it back in there for my own curiosity and got it to crash again, took it out again and put the replacement back in, and once again it does not crash. So that's the MCS51 series microcontroller. It's kind of obsolete these days, but people still play around with it in the hobby scene. They're not made by Intel anymore, but there's plenty of aftermarket providers for those ICs if you ever need to replace one and you don't have one available. As I mentioned, the replacement that I've put into this Becker came from a KE Jetronic ECU from an old 560, one that nobody cares about. It's an emissions choked version ECU that was basically going in the bin, so at least I was able to reuse its MCU. Nothing else of it is of interest anyway. If you're interested in reading about the MCS51 series, you can go and get the data sheet from Intel still. It shows you the various versions. And yes, the 8031 that is in this device has a whopping 128 bytes of RAM. That's pretty much all it needs. I didn't mention that there is 256 kilobits of ROM, but most of that is actually empty. That contains all of the firmware for operating the deck. There's also an SRAM, or a static RAM, IC hiding underneath that MCU on that CPU board. That's what stores the locked state of the deck, and that's provided with 5 volts constantly anytime the battery is connected to the car. When that circuit discharges and there's no longer 5 volts at that SRAM IC, it loses its memory, and the deck will ask for the code the next time you power it on. So it reads from that every single time you do the on operation. If its last state was unlocked, it's going to stay that way. So if you've got a deck that's constantly coming up as locked every time you turn it on, well, you've got a problem with your 5 volts going to the SRAM IC in that CPU package. That's what I've learnt today, messing around with this thing. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it to crash on camera, but yeah, it is what it is. I needed something to entertain myself during my healing process from that well-known virus, but I seem to be getting better anyway. Anyway, that's enough jibber-jabber for now.